Welcome back to International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard, at the Gold Star Standard. Reactions, reviews, and news you can use. Once again, I am your host, International Yada, for the record saying the dollars, and check it out. We got some real news that you can use. Coming out the great state of Illinois, Chicagoland to be exact. Sex Workers Bill of Rights. They said it's a surge in prostitution, sex work going on in Illinois right now, specifically the Chicago area. Let's get straight off into that. Let's see what's going on and what do they plan on doing about the rights of sex workers. Should it be decriminalized? Let's jump straight off into this. Here we go.
Follow up to a story we brought you last week. Residents from several areas in Chicagoland are calling for action to stop an alleged surge in prostitution. They held a news conference earlier tonight. They say there are brazen acts of prostitution and human trafficking in the Garfield Ridge, Sleepy Hollow, and Archer Heights areas. People who live there say it happens near schools and that there are underage girls involved. They're calling for alders in these wards to listen to their concerns and to add more police.
We need for them to restore law and order. We need to see more police in the area making arrests, not only the prostitutes, but their pimps, impound their vehicles, enforce the law. We need to restore law and order. That's why we're here today.
City leaders claim enforcement is underway.
They said enforcement is underway. It's been a surge in prostitution. But what are the rights of the sex workers? What are the rights of the prostitutes? Do they have rights, and what's going on right now in Chicago? Here we go. Let's get straight off into this. The Sex Workers Bill of Rights. Illinois lawmakers introduced the Bill of Rights to decriminalize prostitution. That's right. It's on the floor in Chicago right now. The state of Illinois is trying to decriminalize prostitution. Here we go. Let's get us off into this. A sex worker Bill of Rights is proposed legislation, such as the Illinois Sex Workers Bill of Rights Act, designed to provide sex workers with legal protections, access to health care and benefits, and protection from discrimination, similar to other workers. And I agree with that 100%. Sex workers, adult consensual sex workers that is, should have the same rights as any other worker right here in the United States soil. They should have the same rights and protections as any other worker in the United States. Here we go. These bills typically aim to decriminalize consensual sex work, which advocates believe will allow workers to better vet clients, report crimes, and work in safer environments, while also expunging past criminal records. And I think that's very important to have that's added onto this legislative piece, that the past crimes related to sex works are expunged. It's very important to expunge those past criminal records, make that retroactive. So if this bill is passed, that the past crimes related to sex work and sex workers are expunged from their records. It's only right, because moving forward, we don't want those things held against them once it's made legal. Let's continue. The overall goal is to ensure basic human rights and safety for individuals engaged in sex work. 100%. Decriminalization. The primary goal is to eliminate criminal penalties for consensual sex work. Once again, to eliminate criminal penalties for consensual sex work, which is a big difference between consensual sex work and sex trafficking. Those individuals that are being sex trafficked, which is absolutely the total opposite of a consensual sex worker. Consensual sex workers is just what it says. It's consensual. They agree to it. They are adults. Anyways, which supporters argue helps sex workers avoid harmful situations and seek help without fear of arrest. Legal protections. Here are some of the legal protections. The legislation seeks to grant sex workers legal rights and protections, such as ability to report crimes like stalking or assault by clients without fear of repercussions for their own work. Not sure if you know it or not, but a lot of consensual sex workers have reported being stalked and or assaulted by clients because some of these sick clients believe that, hey, he's nothing but whores and we can do what we please to him. It's not the case. Hopefully this sex worker Bill of Rights passes in Illinois, and a lot can be done about that. These as far as these workers being assaulted, they can report that being assaulted by these tricks, by these clowns. Not all tricks, the ones that's doing the assaulting. Anyways, let's move on. Anti-discrimination bill aims to prohibit discrimination against sex workers in various aspects of their lives, ensuring they receive fair treatment, as it should be. Access to resources. The aim is to provide sex workers with access to essential services, including health care and other benefits, as a means of promoting their overall well-being. Record expungement. Once again, this is very important. Legislation often includes provisions to clear past arrest and conviction records for consensual sex work, allowing individuals a fresh start. Good thing. Human rights. Proponents argue that sex workers are entitled to the same fundamental human rights, including health, privacy, and bodily autonomy, and as any other individual. Reduce stigma and violence. By removing criminalization, the goal is to reduce the pervasive stigma and violence that sex workers often face from both the public and law enforcement. Leave that up there for a while so y'all can see that. Reduce stigma and violence. That's what they're working on right now in the great state of Illinois. Improve public health. Access to health services and the ability to report health concerns to authorities without fear of prosecution are also seen as significant benefits of decriminalization. And that's the Sex Workers Bill of Rights. We got a couple more news stories on this. I'll let y'all check that out. Here we go.
But first, could Illinois be the first state in the nation to legalize prostitution?
Lawmakers in Springfield are debating a bill that would do just that and create a sex workers' bill of rights.
Yeah, Sylvia and Terrence, it's called the Keeping Sex Workers Safe Act, and the idea is to bring this industry out of the shadows to protect what can be very dangerous for those involved. It also creates a sex worker bill of rights that gives those workers the same protections and access to health and benefits that any other worker has. Now, State Representative Will Guzzardi of Chicago is a sponsor and says Illinois should lead the way.
Adults should be able to engage in consensual sexual activity without government interference, and people who are being
Right there it is. Adults should be able to engage in consensual sexual activity without interference from others. Let's take this back a little bit. Here we go.
Access to health and benefits that any other worker has. Now, State Representative Will Guzzardi of Chicago is a sponsor and says Illinois should lead the way.
Adults should be able to engage in consensual sexual activity without government interference, and people who are being coerced and trafficked and forced through violence to engage in sexual activity, that's a crime and it should remain a crime. And
that's a clear distinction right there. Consensual sex workers, adult sex workers should be able to engage in consensual sex work without the fear of law enforcement or government interfering with what they have going on. And that's a big difference between adult consensual sex work, adult consensual sex workers, and human trafficking, where the elements of force, fraud, coercion, threats of violence are used. It's a big difference. Adult consensual sex workers are not forced. No one's using fraud. They're not being coerced to do what they do. It's by choice. And they should have a choice to do what they want to do as adult consensual sex workers. Okay, here we go.
And people who are being coerced and trafficked and forced through violence to engage in sexual activity, that's a crime and it should remain a crime. And that's all our bill does, and I think it's a really important step forward for our state.
Now, the bill also prohibits any sort of discrimination against someone who's a sex worker. Now, in 2013, the state reduced the crime of prostitution from a felony down to a misdemeanor, and that resulted in a reported 97% reduction in prostitution arrests. So essentially, police have stopped policing it. But Republicans in the General Assembly say legalizing sex.
So since 2013, they brought it down from a felony to a misdemeanor. And that resulted in 97% less. We're going to take this from the top. We're going to take this news story right here from the top, and we're going to let it play all the way through. Here we go.
Be the first state in the nation to legalize prostitution.
Lawmakers in Springfield are debating a bill that would do just that and create a sex workers' bill of rights.
Yeah, Sylvia and Terrence, it's called the Keeping Sex Workers Safe Act, and the idea is to bring this industry out of the shadows to protect what can be very dangerous for those involved. It also creates a sex worker bill of rights that gives those workers the same protections and access to health and benefits that any other worker has. Now, State Representative Will Guzzardi of Chicago is a sponsor and says Illinois should lead the way.
Adults should be able to engage in consensual sexual activity without government interference. And people who are being coerced and trafficked and forced through violence to engage in sexual activity, that's a crime and it should remain a crime. And that's all our bill does, and I think it's a really important step forward for our state.
Now, the bill also prohibits any sort of discrimination against someone who's a sex worker. Now, in 2013, the state reduced the crime of prostitution from a felony down to a misdemeanor, and that resulted in a reported 97% reduction in prostitution arrests. So essentially, police have stopped policing it. But Republicans in the General Assembly say legalizing sex work could lead to more of it and more potential exploitation of women and minors.
We know here in Illinois that most people don't start in prostitution of their free will. We also know that this doesn't start as adults. The average age of trafficking victimization starts at 12 to 13 years old. I feel that if we do normalize prostitution and legalize it, it's a disservice to those people who just never wanted to be there in the first place.
Now, this bill is currently being debated in Springfield, and these next few weeks, Sylvia and Terrence, will get a sense of what bills are going to pass and what bills are going to die as lawmakers are in the middle of their session. It's heating up, and they have until the end of May.
Very interesting. And that's going to come around again next year if this legislation doesn't pass. I think they're pushing for 2026. Also, we got another news story on this. Here we go.
Well, Illinois could soon decriminalize sex work. Some state lawmakers are behind a bill that would drop criminal penalties for adults involved in consensual sex work. Marissa Perlman live in our newsroom right now with more on what's behind this potentially groundbreaking bill. Good morning, Marissa.
Good morning to both of you. Yeah, these legislators say, as it stands right now, sex workers and their clients are really operating behind closed doors. Now they're looking to decriminalize prostitution. Why? For access to safety and services.
Sex workers face an unprecedented amount of violence because they are stuck and forced into the shadows.
Now, these advocates have been working on this proposal for years now, saying this will allow safer practices for vetting clients, reporting crimes, and finding suitable locations to work. This bill would also remove past arrest and conviction records for sex workers. Now, as it stands, sex work in Illinois is considered a misdemeanor and can lead to jail time and fines. Now, this bill does not remove criminal penalties for sex traffickers or any abuse against sex workers. Now, prostitution is still illegal in all U.S. states except in certain parts of Nevada.
When we're making these exchanges, that we're not so worried about the policing of our bodies, and also, getting, your door kicked in when you're engaging into sex work. I think people, it's been so hidden in this society. People don't really understand.
Sex workers should have the same basic protections when they engage in their work as anybody else does.
Now, specifics about this bill, how it would be implemented and regulated, still not clear. The timeline for a vote in the legislation, also not clear. What we do know is what happens next. The bill will go through the legislative process in the Illinois General Assembly. That's where there is expected to be a heated debate on all of this.
So that's up for debate right now. Will that be a sex workers' Bill of Rights? International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard, at the Gold Star Standard. Reactions, reviews, and news you can use. Once again, I am your host, International Yada, for the records and the dollars. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And we will see you on the next one.